And we're talking Mountains Made Apart. This is a Jia Zhangke film, and I like this poster a lot. I think what's interesting about the poster is the way that you've got Mandarin language against the English language, which, obviously, just think about, what sort of experience this is setting up. It's obviously setting up that you've got an English interpretation, certainly of the language that's being used. But the fact that you've actually got language from China and also the English language together on the same poster, it works really well for the film, because the whole film is actually about this East and West and this relationship and characters finding themselves isolated by both the East and by both the West and by each other. And the film is very much about distance and isolation, which you will get through the filmmaking style of Jia Zhangke. And it's important to know that Jia Zhangke, who's a terrific filmmaker, and he's a popular. He's like a film festival darling. Like, often when his films are released, they play at a number of film festivals in the West, and the film festival being a really important place for a lot of Asian auteurs to really get their films seen by Western audiences and get kind of a buzz happening for their films. And Mountains Made Apart, Still Life, both played at MIF and did really well at MIF. But the important thing to know about Jia Zhangke is he's a Chinese director who's trying to make subversive films about China or challenging China, political system, social system, materialistic system, as you'll see in this film. But he's very much having to work within particular parameters. And he leaves the canvas of the screen, of actually what's going on between the characters, quite open to interpretation. He doesn't overstate things. He doesn't overstate things for a particular reason. And that's because, well, he doesn't want to kind of get chucked in jail by the Chinese government, or he doesn't want his film banned or censored and things like that, right? So there's a very fine line that he has to walk. But remember, when you're watching the film, just keep that in mind, that, the film won't be as expositional and melodramatic as other films that you're going to see in the course. And that there's a particular reason for that. Okay. So Mountains Made Apart is a peculiar film. It's got 3 parts, 3 time periods, and 3 locations. One of those locations being Perth, Australia, which is really interesting, and I think that's the sequence. It's the final part of the film. It's what I really find so fascinating, and a lot of people in the West seem to be drawn to that sequence more than the other sequences. So you've got this aesthetic going on, and I think what's interesting about the film is it doesn't feel disjointed, these 3 different parts. Well, I don't think it feels disjointed at all. I think it works. There's a particular tone and mood and style that continues across these sequences. But what's really interesting about them is each sequence has its own feel and look. Like when you're in Perth, it feels like it's another world to the world we were just in. And what Jia Zhangke was doing, he was actually kind of shooting his own footage, like in the early 90s, which appears in the film in the first section. And that's interesting. How that kind of documentary footage actually appears. So she's actually shooting on different formats, on video, on film, and there's different ratios going on with the actual just the screen size and things like that. And you will notice that as the film changes time periods and locations, the ratio of the actual screen changes as well. Now, what I'm trying to set up here is this film is a cinematic movie. It's a movie that needs to be watched in a cinematic setting on a big screen. So really important that we watch this film on a big screen to really get actually what's going on aesthetically, which you're going to lose if you're watching this film on a small screen. Okay. Now, how do the changes in time and place give alternating Asian experiences? And it's really important to think about what is the Asian experience, how does that alternate, how does that change, across the film? And by doing that, it's almost like it's saying that these characters themselves are kind of changing with it. Now, the film opens, and I must say, when I started watching this film, I thought, I'm not going to like this film. Because it was like this kind of, it's hard to describe, but it's like this dance number, this choreographed dance number with a number of people. And they're doing a choreographed dance number to the Pet Shop Boys doing their rendition of Go West. Now, I don't have a problem with the Pet Shop Boys at all, and I quite enjoy a lot of Pet Shop Boys songs, but I just thought it's going to be a film that I'm not going to enjoy. It's going to be some sort of kind of, I don't know, cutesy modern day musical or something, using contemporary pop stuff, and it's just not going to work for me. But it does work for me. And the thing about that song, and there's another song, another Asian pop song, is that how he uses this song, Go West, Go West, like literally Go West, from the East to Go West, how he uses that across the film. And you hear it a number of times, and every time you hear it, it feels different, and it has a different meaning. And a great song can just have so many meanings. And you've got the lyrics. Together we will go our way. Together we will leave someday. Together your hand in my hand. Together we will make our plans. And James Douglas, in his piece, he actually used that those lyrics to emphasize just kind of how important the lyrics are and how meaningful the lyrics are actually to the film. So it's not like Jia Zhangke has just sort of picked a favorite Western hit and kind of just inserted it into the film, which can often happen with directors. He's actually used a song that has really profound meaning across the film, from a narrative perspective, and also setting up a particular sound. Music plays a huge role in this film, right? Sounds play a huge role in this film. The changing of accents and language has a huge impact in this film. And the thing about that opening, which I've come to really appreciate, is it's saying you need to listen to this film. This film is actually about listening as much as watching. And with this crazy Pet Shop Boys kind of dance choreographed number thing that's going on, the film is really, really speaking directly to you. It's also saying a number of other things because, it's a Western song, and this is not what we expect often from a Chinese film. This film is saying China is listening and dancing to the West, dancing to the Pet Shop Boys. So this whole idea that everything's suppressed from China and everything's censored and you can't get any, access to anything from the West in China. Well, this film, right from the first shot, is saying, well, that's kind of baloney, because clearly you've got a whole bunch of people listening to Pet Shop Boys. It's saying that China, from a pop culture point of view, is influenced by the West. These people are happily engaging with the Pet Shop Boys. And also, it's, like I said, it's not a closed China that's being represented here. It's a very open China where people freely come and go from particular regions of China. And that's, again, really important, what he's actually doing, the way he sets it up. Okay. Now, welcome to Australia, I may say. Now, if people are going to criticise the film, and it's interesting because a lot of the Western scholars who are kind of writing on it are drawn to the Australian sequence at the end, and Roger Ebert, who we like Roger Ebert a lot, and he was a real he's always championed Asian films. Well, he did when he was alive. He's no longer alive and championing Asian films. Now, he said this. Unfortunately, so he's talking about the Australian section, which is the last section of the film. So we're in 2025. Unfortunately, this section of the film proves to be its weakest part, in part because Jia doesn't seem entirely comfortable working in English, but more because the film lacks the powerful emotional focus provided by Teo and the actress playing her. Okay, so he's saying that basically once he changes, from China to Australia, the film kind of loses its way. Now, why change language and location? Like, why include it, and is it successful? And I think I think it works in actually what he is trying to say about these people and the way that they kind of live these nomadic experiences where they're just constantly on the move. And also how, if it doesn't work, that's almost the point of it, that these people feel so removed and so isolated from their world. If they went to Australia and it felt really natural and pleasant and easy for them, that would almost be going against, I think, what the film's trying to say. It's meant to be jarring and a juxtaposition. It's meant to give a different experience. And the film, it's like I said, is about distance and isolation. And the thing about Perth, which is interesting, why pick Perth? And thank you, Jia Zhangke, for not going to Sydney, because you would think, you're going to Australia, so Sydney Opera House, and we'll conclude at the Sydney Opera House. We'll go to Darling Harbour, and we'll go to Sydney Bridge, and usual kind of sites that people often like to put in a movie, set in Australia. And what's interesting about Perth, you've got the 12 Apostles, which they do travel to, image here. But Perth is like a nowhere place, in a way, ladies and gentlemen, have you been to Perth? Nowhere place. I'm joking, of course. Apart from the bad haircuts, which do see quite prominent in Perth. But I'm not going to get onto hairdressing culture in Perth. But it's like there's nothing. It's not like Sydney, which really identifies people and grounds people to a particular monuments. The whole thing about the Australian sequence is it's nowhere. It's nothing. It's this vast space, and that's what's really important about it. So that's why I think the film is kind of set there. But I'm interested to know what you think about the way Perth is being represented, and do you actually believe, it's Perth, and what's actually going on with the way that sequence is depicted and those characters are depicted. Now, James Douglas, friend of the course, now he was sort of if you look at Roger Ebert, he's just saying, the Australian sequence doesn't work. And I think James Douglas gives a more nuanced thoughts around that. And so he says, and I quote, there's a fascinating question at the heart of this disjunction relating to whether the shift into English truly engenders a drop in quality, a loss of finesse, say, in the filmmaker's efforts. Now, this is an important bit. Perhaps the use of some English simply exposes or clarifies for Anglophone viewers, I suppose that's us, the majority of us, who can't speak Mandarin, some deficiencies in those filmmakers' work that are already apparent to their native audiences, but not mediated to English-speaking audiences by the subtitling. No. And, he goes on to say that the dialogue becomes alarmingly blunt. So there's a problem here. When we're watching a film, a foreign film, right, an Asian film, and we're watching the Asian experience, we're watching on a different register, because it's like we don't watch it how we normally watch, because performance becomes different. Because what's happening with performance is the actors are speaking a language that's foreign to us, right? So we're not watching or judging the film in a way that we normally are. And what James Douglas is saying is that once they start speaking English, that is actually a way of us to access the film and actually talk to the film as a way that would be talked to an English-speaking film or English-speaking audience, and that becomes a problem. Now, so that's an issue, and I think that's really fascinating. And another issue is that perhaps the Australian sequence just isn't as good as the other sequences. Now, I think it is just as good. I think it's just as interesting. And I like the fact, I actually think he's very aware that there are particular things that don't work as well, but I think that's the point. How does the gaze shift when subtitles are not necessary? All right. John Flaus says, that he doesn't like watching an Asian film with the subtitles because he's just staring at the bottom of the screen for the whole film. So he would rather an overdubbed thing. But, it does actually change how we watch the film. And think about that. Where does your eye go? Track how you're actually watching the film. Where do you actually watch and what's actually going on when you're watching it? Okay. Now, I want to talk about Peter Pugsley. And he has written a book, but this week's reading is Asian Aesthetic, which is a terrific chapter. I think there's some wonderful stuff in this chapter. In the way he's just setting up what is an Asian aesthetic, an Asian look, blah, blah, blah. And I want to throw some quotes at you to conclude. We all possess the capacity to recognize an object and see that it may be admired for both its form and function. But the level to which form overrides function, or the object is viewed as containing beauty, is much more subjective and determined by our social and cultural environment. Now, that's what James Douglas was banging on about previously. Right. So, this is the question I have to you. How does the aesthetic change in Mountains Made Apart? Do we look at the Oz section with the same foreign eyes? What happens to the foreignness of the film for us as viewers when the film is in a place that we identify with? There's a scene, when they're on the train, and it's just this kind of suburban train. Every suburban train looks the same in Australia, whether it's in Melbourne or Perth or wherever. And I think that's really interesting. Actually watching a train, you're like, oh yeah, I know that train. I know that bad, interior of those suburban trains with these ugly coverings on the seats and things like that. That's my train. So think about how that changes, how that shifts, and is making something more accessible to us actually a problem? Do we become more critical of that? Is it the foreignness of it is really what appeals to us, and then when it does become something. So think about that. Okay. Resonance. Now, Pugsley uses the word resonance across the chapter, and he uses it for particular reasons. Okay. So a quote, what then are the requirements for the construction of an aesthetic of Asianness? Which is a good question. The most obvious of these when dealing with film would be the direct element of the cinematic experience. Okay, so he's banging on about, he's in a world of the Stephen Tier, with his whole idea of the Asian experience. Okay. Now, this is the question. What cinema experience are we given from this film? Think about that. If I was to ask you, what is the Asian cinema experience of this film? What is the Asian cinema experience of this film? Okay, so have a think about that. Is it experience of, is it almost like when they get to Perth, the earlier scenes, we remember those more vividly because of the difference and because it's less accessible for us. Another quote. When speaking of the mechanical reproduction of an image, whether in a photographic or cinematic context, the extent to which the reproduction corresponds with an individual's interpretation of reality is paramount. Okay. Now, real places, right? Jia Zhangke is using real places. He's going to real places and he's shooting scenes in real places. Places that we know and identify with, right? The bad train in Perth, 12 Apostles, known areas, okay, in China where he's shooting, right? What's the importance of this, of real places? The fact that he goes and he's actually shooting a documentary in some part and he's actually using that across the film. He's actually showing you a real location and a real setting. And I think that's really important in giving you a resonance of actually what's going on. Okay. One more quote. One of the key elements in creating an Asian aesthetic is the use of traditional colours itself, right? A contentious choice because the traditions of numerous cultures in Asia vary so widely. For the West, though, a predominance of red and gold signifies Asia and perhaps Chinese decadence in particular. Okay, interesting. So what's actually going on with the colours in this film? And how do we actually look at the colours, and do the colours change across the film in particular times, in particular locations and things like that? Are we given like this dominance of particular colours over other colours? Is that representing a particular idea of Asianness through colour? Very interesting, I thought. Something else that he says is this whole idea of the pace. This is there an Asian pace? Now, mountains made apart. Some of you may find it a little slow. I mean, it's not slow, okay? And I don't want you to think it's slow, right? But there is something about Asian cinema that has a kind of a slow cinema to it. Now, okay, so this is a quote, right? One final consideration in the creation of an Asian aesthetic is the use of pace and the representation of speed and time in contemporary films. Okay. Jonathan Romney's opening up of the debate into slow cinema in a Sight and Sound article. Sight and Sound is a nerdy film journal in 2010, pondering the demand among cinephiles for films that are slow, poetic, contemplative. Cinema that downplays event in favour of mood, evocativeness, and an intensified sense of temporality. Right. Cinema that downplays event in favour of mood. Now, are we given mood over event in this film? And have a think about that, because I think that's really important to think through actually what's going on. All right, so when you're watching the film, think of pace. What is the pace of the film, right? Does the film favour mood over event? And what does that even mean? Think of the colours. Are there particular like Asian experience colours? Is that even a thing? Sounds and music, again, like just because you hear the Pet Shop Boys or you hear the Australian, you do hear the Australian accent, but you hear English also, across Mandarin and things like that, and also just the setting where it's actually set, and being Asia in Asia and then Asia outside of Asia, which I think is very fascinating. So Mountains Made Apart, there's a whole bunch of stuff to talk through with this film, and it's a terrific film to talk about in regard to the Asian experience and the Asian aesthetic. And Jia Zhangke is a terrific filmmaker. He is considered one of the real important contemporary filmmakers in the world, not just in Asia or in China. All right, I look forward to watching this with you. Remember, it is a cinema film. It's a film for the big screen, and it really needs to be watched on the big screen. And I look forward to joining you at the cinema for this movie on the big screen. Bye for now.